welcome everyone. So today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the transition from point solutions into fully integrated cybersecurity platforms. As you might be aware, Fortinet is one of the market leaders here within the cybersecurity and network security space, and we're very lucky to have one of their best and top engineers joining us today, Mr. Brendon Schodel. So Brendon, why don't I'll have you do just a brief introduction to yourself, and then I'll introduce myself here.
Thank you, Thad. So I have been in the IT industry for 15 plus years, and I have worked across multiple different industries, multiple different sizes of businesses, supporting all different technologies. I've taken a passion to Fortinet. It's kind of something that I've been really interested in from a cybersecurity point of view, and the solution just clicked for me. It just works. So I've been following what they've been doing for the last probably 10 years now, and working very closely with them. That basically sums me up. Over to you, Thad.
Yeah, thanks, Brendon. And look, myself, probably pretty similar. I've been working in the IT space for 10, 15 years now. Started off selling products out of the backup security domain, helping customers with their disaster recovery programs. I remember when disaster recovery as a service was first coming into the market. Then I've done some work with privileged access management, looking after secrets within an organization and how you protect and rotate those credentials. Every vendor that I worked with or manufacturer was a Gartner leading vendor at one time or another. And I decided to finally take my talent into working with end customers in here. So, I joined Virtual Graffiti, and we've continued to grow out the organization by just providing that best-in-class support. Just on to who Virtual Graffiti are. We operate within Australia about 50 different cyber stores. These cyber stores are to help our commercial, government, and education end users. And we've been a Fortinet partner for 20 plus years now. I've put some photos in here of our original cyber store, or one of our original cyber stores, which is the Fortinet store that was known as FortiGuard when it first came out. Brendon will talk on a different FortiGuard today. We actually watched the domain move over to Fortinet at their request a few years after we launched that cyber store. But we've been a strong partner with them since the early 2000s, and we look forward to another 20, 25 plus years of partnership in there. Brendon, do you remember the 50A, this unit at the bottom?
The 50A. It's definitely an old girl. One thing to note about the Fortinet products, and the reason Thad's mentioning the 50A is because their generation of products use the letter as which generation it is. So A being the first letter of the alphabet is the first generation. We then had B, C, D, E, F, and now we're up to G. So Fortinet has been doing this for a while. But yeah, you can see that their website, back, what was it, 25 years ago, you said, Thad, they had the 50A listed on their website. So, Virtual Graffiti has been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, and it's interesting watching the breadth of products, Brendon. Like I was in a Wayback Machine looking at this the other day, and it was just firewalls. There was a basic Forti manager in here and a basic logging tool included. And I'll have to show it to you another time in here, because it's quite the throwback. And as we talk further today, we'll see the breadth of portfolio has grown quite a bit. Brendon, over to you.
Yeah, so Fortinet is a global company, right? They started in the US out of Sunnyvale, California, and they've obviously grown around the world. They have offices in multiple different regions, multiple different countries. You can see that there is actually an office in Sydney as well, and that's where the head office is for Australia. We are part of the APAC region. And in these offices as well, Fortinet also have their own data centers. Not in every office, but in some of their offices. I, for example, have been to Sofia in France, and I've seen their data center in that office, and it's interesting to say the least. Reminds me very much of NextDC, for example. But I think there's over 200 staff here in Australia now. So, they are a very rapidly growing company, sorry. And they are always expanding. So, there's plenty of opportunity with Fortinet.
And I think, they opened the data center in the Sydney office here recently as well, didn't they, Brendan? That's the bottom
correct.
floor of the office. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Sydney data center has only just recently opened up in the last couple of months, to be honest, and they're still building out what services are going to be hosting in there. So they currently use AWS for the FortiGuard, which we will be talking about soon. But like the FortiSASE, which we'll also be talking about, is actually hosted out of the Fortinet data center in Sydney. So there is physical equipment that Fortinet own and operate here in country.
Let's jump into the next slide in here. One of the things with Fortinet is that it's validated. Every single analyst report comes out and says it's one of the best, and it's always a market leader. But it's not only the third-party analysts. I generally will recommend to people to go take a look at third-party reviews. There's the Gartner reviews, which are validated and they verify that you are using Fortinet. But then there's places like Reddit as well, right? And you look at the communities that are behind Fortinet and what end user feedback is. And we have a joke in our office here at Virtual Graffiti: Fortinet is king, right? And we really do believe Fortinet is one of the leading products here, and the analysts tend to agree with us. And we'll talk more on the analysts and the breadth of coverage that Fortinet have in a little bit. But for now, rest assured, you can read at Fortinet at any of the major analyst companies. So what's driving our security decisions today? There's an ongoing threat landscape. We see nation state, we see script kiddies, we see AI coming in, we see regulatory and compliance. There's things like ISO 27001 and SOC 2, but then there's some new ones in here. The environmental piece. Recently going green has been a large topic of the conversation, and how does that fit into their overall security play. And it is relevant. If the Earth is warming up by however many degrees per year, we've got to run our data centers a lot cooler. It causes some problems. There's also some skill shortages. I think I've heard the skill shortage complaint for the better part of 10 years. Brendan, I'm not sure how long you've heard it.
There's always been a skill shortage.
Absolutely. I think it was like one of the first things somebody said to me when I joined the industry was, you don't have to worry about finding work here because there's not enough people. But then economic, so we're seeing chips are going to start getting affected in here by tariffs, and there's a lot of external factors that we have coming in.
Yeah, I was going to say that takes us over to the landscape, right? So in every company, in every business, there's different attack vectors that people could target. So the typical one, that started out very early on is spear phishing, right? Targeting users with fake emails that will look real and that are very hard to identify that aren't real. And it could be as simple as having a PDF file delivered with an invoice and getting someone to pay that invoice. So there's those sort of risks. There's vulnerabilities in Windows and other devices and servers. There's also vulnerabilities in firewalls. Let's not forget that. There's in the CVE process where they identify those vulnerabilities and announce them to the world so that you know about them is really crucial and really becoming more prevalent. You then have physical attacks, right? How do you get into a network when there's air gaps, You know, you have people that are physically doing stuff inside buildings. So it's not just external, you know, vectors. It could be people. It could be real humans on site doing things to your networks. APT groups, you know, they're just groups of people that are trying to get together to combine their efforts, and they have more success because they're looking at all the different areas. They're skilled in different things, you know, and they can attack larger networks. So there's, you know, that's just some examples of what can happen. Ransomware has been, you know, huge. You know, when it started to attack, you know, like energy, for example, there was nuclear reactors overseas that were targeted by ransomware. You know, and how does that happen? You know, that's a very good question. So, you know, we need to protect against this. You know, everyone's moving to the cloud and they're using built-in tools for the cloud. Well, that's not necessarily going to be right for your environment either. You know, you just need to work out what's going to be right to secure your environment and your situations. Supply chain attacks, like trying to remember what that not Sonic, or what that
the SolarWinds attack.
SolarWinds. Thank you.
Yep.
That's the one that I'm thinking of. SolarWinds. Their update chain got breached, right? And that update chain supplied basically a bad update to how many different installs around the world. And then that update was then used to attack different companies. So you got to watch out for those sort of things. 3CX also had a similar one as well, their phone system. So it's not unique. And then you've got insiders, right, that are taking information, they're taking data on USB sticks and exporting it to outside as well. They could also be copying it to their own personal drives. You know, there's all sorts of ways that information can be released, all sorts of ways information can be obtained, and that information is then used to corrupt your network, basically. So yeah, there's all sorts of, and these are only some examples, by the way. There's lots more that we can go into. You know,
I mean, like insider risk, you could break down into like hundreds of categories, right? You know, there's disgruntled employees, there's people who, you know, are just thinking maliciously, or like you can break this down so far. And having the appropriate security controls in place is often a challenge for a lot of people because they don't understand, you know, what they need to have in terms of DLP or insider threat risk management or any of the other appropriate security controls that prevent, you know, data from leaking outside of the organization. And you're never going to prevent all of the data from leaking outside the org, but you've got to do your best efforts in preventing as much as you can from leaving the org in here.
Exactly right. And so one thing we're going to talk about shortly is, you know, how many different products can help you to attack or to achieve this. You know, and how we can bring it into one environment, and that's what we're going to talk about shortly. So as you can see, infrastructure has become more complex, right? There's lots of different types of users. We've got IoT users, we've got laptop users, which could be Windows. There's an uptick in Linux now as well. A lot of people are moving to Linux desktops, and macOS. macOS is becoming bigger and bigger as well. They could be on-site, they could be remote, they could be wired, they could be wireless. There's so many different ways that users connect to information these days. And you've got to protect against all of that. There's no such thing as a perimeter anymore, right? The perimeter is not just the, you know, it's not just a firewall anymore. It's every single device inside your network. And, you know, we've then got the IoT devices, which are cameras, printers, phones. There could be a scissor lift that you can see in the image there. There could be so many different bits of information coming in. A use case that I have is all the trains around Australia, right? Every single train has a firewall on it that is reporting all the sensors back from the train back to a central database. So, you know, they've got to cover all of Australia to do that. And then you've got your applications. So how do these devices access those applications? Are they on-prem? Are they in the cloud? Are they in private cloud? There's so many different ways to access information. And you really need a platform that's going to enhance, but also secure all of this for you and make it simple for your users. Because if security becomes too complicated, then your user efficiency is going to drop. So, it needs to be simple as well.
And you find users skirting that responsibility as well, Brendon,
Yeah,
over,
absolutely.
Like going back to like even the printers and the IoT devices in here, one of the Signals Directorate recommendations, I talked about this in another webinar last month actually, is to have MFA enabled on your printers, and that's a little trickier to do, maybe the C-suite or maybe the secretary doesn't want to type in a code when you're making scans and sending it to a desktop in here. However, it's got to be looked at holistically from an organizational standpoint. Hey, we're not doing this just for fun. It's for high security requirements, so that we are best of breed according to Signals Directorate recommendations in here.
That's exactly right. And that usability needs to be simple, but not take a huge amount of time. If it takes too much time, people are going to do exactly that. And they might even install their own applications or come up with their own workarounds.
Oh, it's funny when you see people, instead of screenshotting, taking a picture of things with their phone and then sending it to
yeah, I've seen that too.
That one. Yeah,
I've seen that one too. Yeah, very much so.
The big thing too is attackers are, when they are getting in, they can stay for quite a while. It's average time from detection to remediation, 21 days if they're even caught in there. And then after that, you're looking at 36 hours. I've seen some of these incident response things, and that hours on the clock there is the team working 24/7, right? So if at 4 a.m. you might be a little bit tired, you might be thinking, I can't do the incident response. Unfortunately, you don't really have that. We have in here the new SEC rule, that's 4 days. That's more of a US regulation in here. However, we are approaching less and less time for reporting different different attacks in here. 52% of organizations are reporting SecOps are harder than 2 years ago. Just the threat landscape is changing as well.
Yeah,
and
one
Brendon,
thing that
how do you think that? Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, I've been involved in this process in the past with remediation, and I got brought in after the fact, like after the customer was already compromised, and turns out the attacker had been in there for 6 months before they did anything, right? And all they were doing was just collecting information. They copied all the data to Mega. There was 4 terabytes of data stolen, right? And this sort of situation, it's just unbelievable that people can get in and be in there for so much time and not notice anything. So the risk is real. The risk is there. And once people are in, they like to have multiple ways to get back in. So, it is a big effort to remediate.
Like you see whole teams have to go in and do the incident response, especially if you're a single lone IT manager, you do have to bring in that additional assistance. I think we do see some great help from the ACSC and some of the other organizations within the country. However, ideally we'd want to prevent that in the first place, right? And that kind of brings us into our next topic here. And Brendon, I'll let you talk about what's Fortinet's approach. We've talked about the fear. We've talked about what the problems are. Why does Fortinet have their platform approach? Why don't they just make firewalls?
Yeah, so Fortinet obviously started out their life as a firewall company, and that's what you can see, when we looked at Virtual Graffiti's original website. However, as you can see, the landscape has expanded, the infrastructure has changed. The industry has moved and, adapted to different situations and different things happening, and technology getting better and better and faster, and, we're able to do more things. So to do that, Fortinet's had to evolve. They've had to change how they work. They're not just a firewall company anymore. They now need to protect every bit of information traversing the inside of your network as well as externally. We need to have adaptive platforms that can identify a threat, react to it, and do it immediately, as opposed to waiting for someone to come along and do it for them. So what Fortinet have done is they've taken this point solution product set where you've got on the left hand side, you've got all these different products, which is SOAR, DLP, IAM, EDR or XDR, you've got ZTNA and NAC, you've got all these different solutions that will then tie together to a SIEM platform, which is your centralized logging and event management tool. And Fortinet have integrated it into one platform. So last year's messaging from Fortinet was, we're now in the platform era. It's not just a point solution anymore. And all these products can communicate. They share logging, they share intelligence, they share device information. And this really creates that integrated and seamless environment that you could, log into SOAR and see all the events that have happened on the SIEM. And there's playbooks that can help you remediate. It can also be automated as well. The playbook could go away and quarantine the device. And it needs to be able to do that. It needs to talk to the firewall. It needs to talk to your switching. It needs to talk to your wireless. It needs to talk to the endpoint, because it can go to the endpoint and actually quarantine the endpoint from, being on the network. But then we also need to integrate with the cloud solution. So that's where we've got the CASB, so the Cloud Access Security Broker service. We've got email filtering. We've got your web application firewall to protect your web apps. So, all these products are now combined together and sharing that intelligence. So then, we can also see where the traffic is coming from, where it's going to, and actually analyze it properly. Does that sum it up well, Thad?
Yeah, and I think the other thing to mention too is the ease of integration back with these different platforms within Fortinet, right? I've integrated third-party SIEMs, and I've integrated them with firewalls and email security gateways and SASE solutions. And if the correlation rules aren't pre-built, it is tough, right? You've got to go in and build this all yourself. And look, to be frank, a lot of customers in the Australian market don't have the time to go through and do that. They don't have 20, 30 people, cyber teams or security analysts in here who are familiar writing their own correlation rules. They need to be able to digest the log from the email security gateway and look at it quickly to see, okay, is it a threat or is it not a threat, right? So I think Fortinet's approach, in terms of ease of integration, is one of the best in here.
Yeah, and honestly, that's where I get my passion from. My passion for Fortinet is not just because of what I think of the firewall. It's because of the whole platform, and how it does integrate and how it does share its telemetry. That's where my passion is. It's about that information, gathering and reaction, really. That's what really gets me motivated.
Brendon, but we know Fortinet is king in here.
Absolutely.
It looks like we have a few questions. I've kind of missed the Q&A section. Before we jump forward, let's take a look at Raphael's question in here. Okay, Brendon, I'll let you answer this. Didn't Fortinet have a recent compromise? Over 16,000 Fortinet devices compromised with Symlink backdoor.
Funny enough, I actually haven't read this one yet, so let me just have a quick read. Of the URL.
While you're having to read, I'll give my general CVE guidance here with Fortinet as well. Look, if we also look at Microsoft or any of the other tools that we use every day, the number of CVEs that we see out there is ridiculous. What you can do to prevent these vulnerabilities from being exploited within your environment is be up to date with your patching, right? I tell anyone, no matter what your firewall vendor is, they all have CVEs that are out there, whether they have been exploited in the wild or they're known about just yet. Look, we can't solve for everything. However, Fortinet do have their visibility and automatic patching schedule if that is something that is of concern to you.
Yeah, so
But
reading this like this attack, it was actually a vulnerability that was listed in 2023. And so this vulnerability was actually due to the SSL VPN. Now, one thing to note about the SSL VPN is under the hood, it uses common open source technologies. So it uses OpenSSL and it uses Apache. So what actually happened in this case, it's not actually unique to Fortinet. There are other vendors out there that have the same vulnerabilities because they use the same software. What Fortinet have since done is obviously they've patched it. So they've done a firmware upgrade to resolve that issue. And then now what they're doing is they're finding that the devices are still infected, and that's because it's the vulnerability went deep. And that's why these devices are still out there. Now, there is guides on how to resolve it. So it is possible to fix it. But what Fortinet have also done in recent times, which is actually more important, is the SSL VPN functionality has been removed from the FortiGate itself. So starting in the latest firmware, so 7.6.3 and 7.4.8, I think it is, you can no longer actually use SSL VPN. What they have done is they have rebuilt the web mode using their own code. So it is more secure, doesn't have as many vulnerabilities because it is now their own code as opposed to someone else's code. So they are actively working on the SSL VPN, and the reason it was removed is because it has been highly vulnerable in the past. So they are very much aware of it, and it is going to happen. And like I said, it's not just Fortinet. Now this leads into another issue, right? Is it is very critical to maintain good patching cadence.
C recommendations are 48 hours in here.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
patches
exactly
to
right.
be rolled out, and even that should probably be brought down
That's
even
it.
further.
So the one that I identified earlier, where the attackers were in the environment for 6+ months, right? The vulnerability that was used to gain access to the network was actually in the SSL VPN daemon itself, and it leaked the credentials of the users that were logged into the VPN. Now, the problem with this is that it was actually poor management from the IT team because they were using domain admin credentials for their VPN. So there was, issues around the design, but also it was poor patching because all they had to do was patch the FortiGate anytime in the last 3 years, and they would have resolved the issue. But the problem is that they didn't patch it for 5 years, right? And so because of that, the vulnerability was still there, it was still active. So that patch management is critical to having a secure environment.
Look, I do understand it's tough sometimes. You have these legacy applications that include one service from a old operating system that you still have to have. However, you kind of have to move upwards and onwards with operating systems within the organization in today's day and age, and rebuild some of these systems, if they're built in specific ways.
Here's a bit of IT history. I still have a client using Windows XP and WordPerfect. WordPerfect hasn't been around for decades.
Look, I still get asked to secure Windows XP and even earlier versions of Windows than that, Brendon. And we have the security products here at Virtual Graffiti to do it. Is it best practice to keep these OSs in place? No, but hey, there's this one widget manufacturer who has to make a widget, and it's running the oldest version of Windows to run that robotic arm that you've ever heard of in here.
That's it.
So like, it's unfortunately the widgets have to get made in here.
That's it.
Let's jump
And that's what happens.
into probably our next one here, just conscious of our time. Consolidation. So consolidation is accelerating consolidation is accelerating to reduce risk and minimize the complexity. I looked at a customer the other day where they, from going to Fortinet, they had over 150 vendors within their environment here. That's including your Microsoft, your Dell, etc. They're able to get that list down to 30 to 40 different vendors, by consolidating all of their security products within a single platform. But then it improved their security posture as well. So we see 65% of organizations improve their security posture, and then 60% improve the security capabilities as well. They're not spending as much time hunting around for different dashboards. It's all single pane of glass, being able to communicate with one another. Then these last two, 42% fit vendor strategy within the organization, and then 36% are flat or reduced security team staffing. Look, I always think you should always add more to the security team if you can afford it. However, look, it is an interesting stat as well.
Yeah, and that consolidation is really crucial to Fortinet's vision. By having multiple vendors in one environment, if you have issues or you have, even a security issue, for example, the vendors start looking at each other and going, is it them? Is it us? Is it, who is it? And then you got to start analyzing the logs. They're all different. So then you need a SIEM product that understands all the logs. And it becomes quite cumbersome to really, evaluate your environment. And that's where the Fortinet is, trying to consolidate your network into one vendor. And that single vendor approach then means that all those devices understand each other. They all, like, their SIEM is, one vendor, so therefore it understands, every log that's being received. And it becomes that, single vendor consolidation, so that they can then look at the whole environment holistically and say, this is where the attacks are, this is where your vulnerabilities are, and it really helps that diagnosis part. This leads into that one platform, right? Fortinet have the one operating system, the one, the one, I was trying to come up with a different word than platform.
It's more than one operating system, but it's one one platform for sure, right? The operating systems all communicate with one another.
Yeah, that's it. Most devices share the same FortiOS operating system, which is why I say one operating system. But under the hood, you've got different pillars. You've got your secure networking, which is your firewalls and your switches and your access points. And it's really providing that network access for all your devices, which then leads to that security operations, right? So how do we then analyze what's going on and react to it? Which then the journey has evolved into that universal SASE, where we've now got users at home, we've got users on the road, we've got users in different countries. How do we bring them into the network and protect their data and their usage as well? And then underpinning all of that is all the services that Fortinet offer, which is, the FortiCloud. So inside FortiCloud, we have their cloud-hosted services that could be the management and the analytics and everything else that is receiving those logs. You've then got the FortiGuard Labs, which is then underpinning all of that, and that's where all the intelligence goes to. And Fortinet has the largest R&D division out of any vendor. And that R&D division is constantly looking for threats. They're constantly updating every device around the world every 2 hours, with the new intelligence and the new threats that they've learned. And then, that's then applying to your firewall policies to then, prevent those attacks from happening. You've then got AI, which is now playing a big role, and it's helping understand what's going on and simplify that investigation need. And the AI is also used in the FortiGuard Labs to identify the threats and, really understand whether they're real or false positives. There's a lot of things going on in this environment that Fortinet are offering to help better protect your network.
Brendan, we just have a question here, and it kind of goes into our next slide, which you've got here. I'll let you answer the question as we go into the next slide, if that works for you.
Yeah,
So
go
we
for
have
it.
Jesse asking, how does Cisco compare? They have a fairly cohesive platform.
So do you want to? Yeah. So if you move into the next slide, that's it.
Almost perfect timing, actually.
Almost perfect timing. That's it. From my understanding of Cisco, and it really depends on which products you're talking about, because Cisco obviously have multiple different products and multiple different solutions. The Meraki environment, for example, it has some of the features. It has some analytics. It has a lot of the intelligence as well. But what they're missing is they're missing a lot of the enterprise features out of the Meraki system. And that's where you have to step into the Cisco stack and you get firepower and other platforms. To be honest, I'm not an avid user of Cisco. I've done migrations away from it. So as for how good their filtering is and how good their R&D is, I can't really comment. But from a next generation firewall point of view, the real two competitors are Fortinet and Palo Alto. But Palo Alto doesn't have the entire platform, and that's why we're talking about Fortinet today, is because as you can see on this slide, you've got those three pillars with different products in them, right? So that's secure networking, you've got your firewall, and there's virtual firewalls as well for your cloud applications, like your private cloud, so Azure and AWS and GCP. You've also got 40 SASE, you've got 40 switches and 40 APs, you've got 40 extenders for that 4G and LTE access. We've then got AI ops, which is then reacting to, your SD-WAN and your wireless and your wired networking. We have 40 NAC, which then identifies devices on the network and profiles them. So, there's a whole bunch of products that fit into this, but they all share that telemetry. So then, the network can self-heal and self-adapt. You've then got Universal SASE, which is now protecting your endpoint. And behind the scenes, it really is just a FortiGate with SD-WAN enabled on the back end, with a whole bunch of stuff built into it. And that also includes FortiMonitor, so that we can get that endpoint monitoring, so we know what the performance of that endpoint is from the endpoint to the service that they're trying to access. We also have IAM, so we want to identify those users so we know what the users are doing, and we can also restrict access specifically for a user to specific targets. So no longer are we just allowing everything to every server. We're actually trimming it down to just users, which then moves into that security operation, because we want to know what the users are doing, what information they're gathering, where they're sending it. We want to know every bit of information that we can. So then, when an attacker gets in, we know which users compromised, we know which machines are compromised. We can go and resolve that issue, and also protect your environment from that. So we've got another device in that security operations, which is FortiDeceptor. And it puts breadcrumbs around your network to basically gain the attention of the attackers. And then it can identify that, hey, this device is being attacked, and then shut it down. So, and because FortiDeceptor, if it's getting attacked, it's a fake device anyway. So, it doesn't really matter if it gets attacked. That's the entire point of it. So the breadth of products is, I think Fortinet's up to what, 55 products now. Something like that. Anyway.
I think Cisco has a fair share, and same, Palo have their fair share of products. What I compare it to in here is, well, Brendan, is it depends on the maturity of the org, right? If you're building a security program from scratch, or you need to go to 0 to 100 as fast as possible, Fortinet is king for that sort of thing. You won't get the alert fatigue across 50 different dashboards in here. Some organizations do have the infrastructure in place to support that. Most of them are not in the Australian market here. We're talking about the large corporate, global 50 companies that have large security teams, where they can manage 500 different security dashboards. Fortinet simplifies that conversation. With Cisco, you've got to go look at, then you've got to acquire Splunk, and then it's this whole different dashboard for Umbrella, and then it's a whole different dashboard that doesn't integrate back with any of the others, into a single platform in here, where with Fortinet, it comes pre-made, pre-templated, and can automatically join each other.
And I think that's one of the biggest things about the secure networking stack as well is, the FortiGate itself acts as a switch and wireless controllers. So whenever you manage your network, whether it's a branch site, whether it's your head office or your data center, because the FortiGate manages the switch and APs, it's that one dashboard, it's that one environment. And then when you take the next step and you have multiple sites, we use FortiManager to control all of that. And it's still that single pane of glass because it's still that one device that's controlling the entire network. Whereas I believe in competitor environments, outside of Meraki so much, but the competitor environments, it's still point products. You still have a firewall, you still have firepower. Firepower doesn't control the switching. So then you still have to go to the switching. Doesn't control the wireless. Now you have to go to the wireless controller. So it's still individual products. And Aruba's getting that too with their cloud product. They're slowly enhancing it as well. But with Fortinet, you don't need the cloud to be able to control it. It's all controlled on-prem out of that one device. And it doesn't require any licensing either. It is just built into the device and free for use, for you to manage your entire network. FortiManager requires a license, but the actual switch and AP management doesn't.
I think we can. There are some time and places for licensing within Fortinet, and we can say that for another call in here. But I'm just conscious of time. We kind of have to zip through these last few slides in here.
Yep, let's go.
So let's power through it. So what's happened? Okay, so a few years ago, as we saw when AV Firewalls or FortiGuard.com originally launched, we had one product on there, and that was network firewalls, the A series devices. Now we have 5G devices, we have Wi-Fi 7, we have AI ops, we have email security, we have sandboxing, we have DLP, we have DEM, so many things. Why this explosion all of a sudden, Brendon? The world's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, and this comes down to that whole infrastructure getting more and more complex and devices getting more and more complex, and that ease of information is really king. And how do we get it to people, and how do we get it to them fast? And that's what's really grown a lot of this. But then with that obviously enhances the security operation. So then we've got different pieces that secure all the different pieces of the infrastructure. And that's why we're talking about, the platform, so that they all integrate and they all share telemetry and they all talk, to provide that secure experience.
So what is the platform?
So once everything is connected and integrated, the FortiGuard AI is what's really identifying all those threats. And I spoke about it a little bit earlier. And it really underpins, Fortinet's strategy around protecting each device around the world and giving it updates. There's 6 million firewalls around the world, that they're collecting information from. 3 million web gateways. There's 20 million emails that are going through the email filtering. All this is being inspected and analyzed every minute of every day. And there is no way that humans could do that. You could throw thousands of humans at it and still not match AI. So that's what they're using. There is also 5 million sandbox users around the world. So files are getting uploaded to a sandbox and then inspected in real time as to what those files are doing, or what those URLs are doing. So then, if it's got a threat in it that no one's seen before, it can identify it and block it. And then it updates the FortiGates all around the world so that it blocks it as well. And it's not just the FortiGate that gets these updates, it's also the web filtering, it's also the email filtering, it's the endpoints, it's the sandboxes, it's every device that shares this telemetry. So, we want to extend that protection across your network, which is what I mentioned before about the FortiGate being the controller, right? The FortiGate controls the switches, it controls the APs and the extenders, and then it uses the FortiNAC, for example, to identify the devices plugged into that network. And then, we can really knuckle down as to what's where, what's plugged in where, what's connected where, which user is on that device, what's that device going to, or what's that user going to. And this is across, where from as little as a one-person branch, where we might just have one device, right up to data centers and, virtual cloud, or, cloud applications like Azure and AWS. And we can even protect SaaS applications like Microsoft 365 and Salesforce and things like that as well. And underpinning all of that is that FortiGuard Labs technology. And the AI Ops, which is then also collecting all the logs from that environment and then, reacting to it and providing recommendations. And all of these solutions are underpowered by that one OS, which is what is really critical, and that's FortiOS. Because it's all the same operating system, they all understand each other.
So we're starting to see the evolution here to what's called universal SASE. So if you would have asked me probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I remember saying it quite clearly, what is SASE? It's somebody else's firewall in the cloud here. To a degree, yes, it still is. However, the landscape has changed quite a bit. We've seen, organizations go from having 300 users sitting in an office and any remote users VPNing back to half their workforce being remote in here. So it's quite the change. And look, before, if you wanted to secure those users, we're talking 50 different vendors, right? Then it's gone down to 20 vendors. And now we're finally getting to a point where we can approach this with a single vendor approach, and Fortinet has an entry-level product in here that addresses all sizes of the market. So whether you're 50 users or 5,000 users, Fortinet has a solution for you.
And the key thing, the key thing about the Fortinet SASE solution as well is that it's underpinned by the FortiGate. And as Thad just said, it's the firewall in the cloud. That's exactly what it is. It's the FortiGate running in the cloud. And so because of that, it's still part of that FortiOS. It still receives the FortiGuard updates, and it protects the end user from, wherever they are. That's really the crux of the SASE solution from Fortinet.
Yeah, well, and now it's even more, right? Because it includes some of the endpoint protection included.
Correct.
In there.
That's right.
But then you as a user don't have to manage that firewall in the cloud, which is a huge plus, right? Firewalls on-prem, you still have to manage that.
Exactly right.
So OT, I think we were talking a little bit about OT earlier, Brendan, and I think I've had a few chats with the team here this last week. OT security it's tough, right? We see these industrial control machines come out. Schneider has them, whether it's their UPSs or it's their robotic arms or whatever it is. These devices have to be protected in here. And how you protect those is different from your traditional endpoint. And those manufacturers had to remote in to the sites. And you need to secure that connection as well, right? That's where the rest of the Fortinet ecosystem comes into play here, with the privileged access management solution, the network access control, the Forti client that runs on those devices if it's capable, and how you connect back to those. We see in here a rugged extender and a rugged access point. These aren't always warehouses are not the most friendly places to hang Wi-Fi.
They're really not.
Yeah. I think we've both seen enough boom arms in there, and people trying to hang stuff. Look, it's hard to even shut down the warehouse for a day so that you can hang up access points, let alone getting to the places.
And that's actually one of the biggest problems in OT is that, like, a lot of these devices, which are SCADA and PLCs and things like that, they can't be shut down. So some of them haven't been patched in years, right? And there may not even be a patch for it. So they are always vulnerable to attack. So how do we protect it? And that's where this solution comes in. It's protecting those devices because, you know, they're vulnerable themselves. And if they do get shut down, for example, something might blow up. So it is 100% mission critical that they cannot be restarted. And you know, there's solutions in place. Like for example, using FortiPAM, we can actually prevent the devices from being restarted or shut down from the user typing the restart command. Right. So you know, there's solutions in here that will help protect those devices in every way.
Brendan, just before we move on to probably my favorite slide in here, we've got a question from Evelyn. Is it possible to use the Fortinet ecosystem without any physical offices or VM infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the FortiSASE comes in. So using FortiSASE, which is their cloud-hosted firewall solution and endpoint solution, you can basically, what happens is you get the endpoint solution is baked into FortiSASE. You deploy that to your machines, and it gets installed on every single device, or every single Windows or Mac or Linux, or it could even be iOS and Android devices. And that endpoint will then VPN back into the Fortinet cloud, and all the internet traffic will go over that VPN. Now, because of that, therefore, that traffic is then going through a FortiGate. Now, when that traffic goes through a FortiGate, it gets logged. We can see who the user is, so we know what that user is doing. It gets all those FortiGuard updates. And more importantly, we can prevent things like CryptoLocker and stuff like that from being accessed as well. And then it also goes, there is a SOC as a service platform as well, so it can even go to the SOC service and, you know, constantly get analyzed and looked at for threats. So you can absolutely use that Fortinet ecosystem if you have no physical infrastructure or even VM infrastructure. Yeah, that's probably the best description I can come up with.
In worst case, you know, if you do need a FortiGate firewall somewhere, you know, it's not, and you do have some services you want to split up, it's not that hard to put a new FortiGate in Azure or any of the cloud providers, right?
No, it's really not.
You know, we're talking an hour or two. However, you know, understandable if you don't have firewalls within your network today, you know, we can still be protected.
Yeah. A use case that I actually had, sorry to take up a little bit more time, but I had a school that had a third-party firewall vendor that they weren't happy with, but they still had licensing for 3 years, so they didn't want to leave it. So my solution was to actually use FortiSASE on all the student devices. So that didn't matter how the students connected, whether it was on the school Wi-Fi, whether it was on the 4G, whether they were at home, it doesn't matter. All that traffic went to the FortiGate, so then we could apply the pastoral care needs to those students, which is looking for self-harm, it's looking for cyberbullying, it's looking for all of these things, you know, and then provide reports to the teachers to say, hey, little Johnny's thinking about hurting himself, you need to have a chat, right? We can fully support that even if you're not using Fortinet infrastructure on your sites.
All right, we'll jump into the last three slides in here. We'll see why this one's my favorite. You know, Gartner here on the left-hand side talks about all the different point solutions that you need to secure your network. So you see in the protection stack here, we've got a WAF, we've got zero trust network access, we have IDPS, we have secure web gateway, we have DLP solutions, we have data classification, right? And then we look at it from a Fortinet perspective, and really, if you break it down, it's only a few different applications that we need to go work with it to cover every single point solution that Gartner suggests. You know, otherwise you've got to look at 90 different point solutions in here, point products. You know, and it's quite hectic to go manage, and you're just not going to have a good time. You know, whether
Yeah, I was
you're
going to say it's not
50
fun for
user,
anyone.
yeah, whether you're 50 users or 5,000, you know, it's just I could see the headaches in it now. I'm sure you can too, Brendan.
Oh, 100%.
So look, we do just have 5 minutes left in here. Let's open the floor for some Q&A. We'll give 1 minute. I know we've kept everyone on here for a long time, so if there's no questions, fair enough. We've had some great interactions from everyone while we've been in the call.
Yeah, I think the questions have been really good.
Yep. Okay, isn't it concerning to put all eggs in one basket with Fortinet?
Look,
Brendan, I can take this and then you can, or
yeah, go for it.
Either way.
Yeah, go for it.
Look, your eggs never are all in one basket, right? If you have your email security solution with Microsoft, or you're using Gmail, you know, there's additional security controls in there. Your Microsoft licensing also includes things like Smart Screen, right? So that's an additional layer. And one thing I always recommend to everyone is, hey, have 2 or 3 layers of your cyber defense. So you're not only doing your web filtering at the firewall, gateway firewall level, or your SASE level, but you're also doing it with your Microsoft licensing as well. That's been my theory here for quite a few years. In case you miss something with one product, it's picked up by another. Go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, on top of that, it really comes down to your environment and how strict you need to be. So, like, for example, you know, the big ISPs and defense and things like that, right? They might have a Fortinet firewall at the perimeter, but then they have a, you know, a checkpoint behind it. So all the traffic has to go through 2 firewalls from different vendors to be able to get into their network. You know, but that's a really tightly controlled network. If you just want something that's secure, that has best practice, things like that, then, you know, Fortinet definitely have a very good solution for that. But the key thing is that by having it all, as you say, putting all your eggs in one basket, it kind of is and kind of isn't, because they're all different products. And even inside Fortinet, they're actually different teams, and the teams don't communicate as well as what they should do with each other. But what that means is that, you know, they're all developed independently. So they're going to have different security in place, even though they do share the same FortiGuard intelligence. They are their own product in their own right. So it's not really one basket if you look at it that way. But the advantage is that, you know, if you do have a problem, or you do have a breach or something like that, then when you call TAC and get TAC to look at it, you're going to have the one team, or the one group of people that are going to look at that environment as a whole and understand the entire environment, because it's all one vendor. But whereas when you get multiple vendors, and I've been in this situation in the past, you know, I had Fortinet on the phone looking at radius logs, and then I had Xeris on the phone looking at radius logs. And Fortinet are going, well, this is a Xeris problem. Here's the evidence. Xeris are going, well, you know, this is a radius problem. You know, go talk to Fortinet. And it's like, well, you know, who do I talk to? You know, and then you don't get help because you've got multiple solutions. So there's pros and cons to both. You know, and the more complex you make it, the harder it's going to be to work with people. But that complexity could be necessary in your environment. It just comes down to how far down that cybersecurity rabbit hole you go.
And
that's probably the key thing. We
actually had a good point by Raphael. He said, including Microsoft security means another pane of glass, doesn't it? Look, as much as we'd want to, I think we're not getting rid of that Microsoft admin portal in here.
God no. God no.
Know, there's always going to be some security controls with our gateway vendor. You know what Fortinet and does is make sure those controls that are in place are the correct ones in place for your organization if needed. You know, and by looking at the logs coming from your M365, you know, we can say, okay, you know, we have no issues with our configuration in here. But I don't think we're going to get rid of that admin portal anytime soon, are we?
No, God no. And you're never going to have truly one pane of glass, because you've got individual servers to manage. Like even me at home, right? I've got Fortinet access points, Fortinet switches, Fortinet firewalls. I've got manager, analyzer, PAM. I've got all of this. But you know what underpins all of that as well? All my Linux machines, and they're all CLI based, and I manage them all in CLI. So, you're never going to get rid of it.
Yeah, I think it's just simplifying how many different vendors and platforms you do have to manage, right?
Yeah, correct.
If you have a
That's what it's
separate
about.
IoT platform and so on, it becomes hectic.
That's it. Anyway, just to cover it off, we do offer workshops as well. So if anyone wants to do some hands-on labs, we can offer that, and we can organize a time for you to sit them. They range from anywhere from, getting your Fortinet certified professional badge, and we can do even point product labs as well. So we can do Forti Manager or Forti Analyzer or Forti PAM. There's all sorts of training that you can participate in. You just have to reach out. You can see, the email address in my LinkedIn profile, and any one of us can help you with that.
Awesome. Well, look, I want to thank everyone, and Brendon, thank you as well for your time today. We've gone a bit over, which is fantastic to see. But let's say just thanks to everyone, and then please be in touch, and thank you again for attending.
And thank you for sticking with us.
Awesome. Have a great day, everybody.